So a little bit of positioning before we get started. Earlier webinars talked about the scale of modern slavery across the world and within the UK. But behind every number is a human being, someone who's been exploited through the use of coercion. Psychological and physical trauma are experienced by those who've survived, and often they are left broken, unable to trust others, feeling hopeless and alone in the world. And so this webinar is moving that conversation on from last year. And we want to really focus on the criminal exploitation of young people operating through the county line mechanisms. The panel will discuss the current picture in Sussex and explore the implications this has on young people, as well as the services that support them. So please add your thoughts and your input as we go through. We want to hear from you as well as the panel, and help us all put the pieces together. And what I found on the last two is empowering people to do something. I felt a real call to action at the end of those last two sessions. So let's continue that positive energy in as constructive a way as we can. So that's your background. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to hand over to our first panelist, which is Dr. Christine Hickle. Christine, thank you for joining us today.
Very happy to be with you. So I'm going to share my slides. I've got a couple of slides here to sort of talk through some of the research that I'm a part of at Sussex with colleagues here and several other universities and practitioners throughout the country. I'll be talking in particular about a project that was done locally at a nearby local authority with several nearby local authorities, but also bringing in some kind of reflective considerations from several other projects throughout the country where we're working with practitioners in both charities and in local authority children's services who are working with county lines. And I think, I guess I'm framing this as sort of critical perspectives because I want to sort of start with some of the questions that are being raised for us in research. We're trying to think about how is this conversation evolving? What do we understand about young people's experiences? What are we missing perhaps? So the context, and again, I think you'll probably hear from other panelists, other pieces of this context are really important. From my perspective, some of the things that I guess I've seen and I'm kind of experiencing in my research is that county lines is a real form, but also a very politicized form of drug distribution. I'm joining you now in between teaching a long course on adolescence with social work practitioners. This is midday, that course, and we've spent a long time just this morning talking about a lot of the problems that we frame now are not new problems, right? Young people have been selling drugs and participating in drug selling and being exploited by other people, by their peers and other adults for a long time. And there's some, a good case to be made in relation to it becoming and evolving a new business model, whilst also being a problem that's framed very particularly by state actors in unique ways. We see the problem kind of increasing and gaining momentum and attention through an increase in national referral mechanism referrals. And there's a separate conversation probably to be had in relation to what that means and the usefulness of that, and how the national referral mechanism, that system has changed to account for increasing recognition that county line cases are in fact they're experiencing trafficking, and the trafficking legislation is useful in these cases. We also know from work on the ground that systemic factors like poverty and the chronic underfunding of activities for young people put them at risk for exploitation, that allowing them to be in context where the environments they're in are unsafe and are having to make decisions in that unsafe environment for themselves is an important risk factor that we have to address. And we also know that the issue of school exclusions in particular is a real pinch point, is a point when that increased risk of county lines involvement kind of shoots through the roof. And yet we don't quite see school policies catching up to that, or conversations happening to say that when young people are excluded from school, their risk increases substantially. We have to address that point for them. The other kind of real interesting policy context here, something we're kind of grappling with as social work researchers, is that statutory guidance really compels safeguarding professionals to think about exploitation in all its forms as child abuse. But this shift in seeing wider issues of abuse outside the family home as within their remit, it contravenes the traditional mandate of the child protection system here in England in particular. So this isn't something that social workers who've been around for a long time, or police officers who've been around for a long time, are trained traditionally to see as child protection issues and child abuse issues. It really stretches our capacity to think about what safeguarding is. And it also, county lines in particular, informs other forms of child criminal exploitation, really troubles this kind of victim-perpetrator binary, which our system is set up to to respond to, right? We respond to see some people as victims and some people as perpetrators, and we have to separate them and deal with them in the way they're supposed to be dealt with. But this, because of young people's experiences in county lines and their experience of being criminally exploited, jumps back and forth, sometimes sequentially, one or the other, sometimes at the exact same time, that their agency and intentionality in criminal exploitation situations remains kind of contentious. In a piece of research I'm going to talk about in just a minute, there was a lot of assumptions by professionals that young people's behavior was really intentional. And, all of us just have to spend 30 seconds thinking about our own adolescence to think that quite a lot of what we did as teenagers wasn't that intentional, right? We made a lot of decisions that were impulsive of the moment because our friends were there, right? We did quite a lot like that. And so there's a lot, because of the attention and the seriousness, the implications of harm around county lines. Sometimes it seems like people forget that a little bit and go, sometimes sometimes we are really intentional about our behavior as a 15, 16-year-old. Sometimes we're really not, right? Sometimes we just end up in a situation and it feels a little bit out of control for us as well. And so how do we manage that? How do we kind of see young people's agency and intentionality in these situations when there's a risk of life, when there's serious harm? And how do we integrate welfare-oriented and criminal justice responses and public safety-oriented responses? How do we deal with the fact that there really is a serious risk of harm? Also, that harm is being engaged with by a really traumatized child, by someone who's responding from their own set of experiences, their own feeling of unsafety. We also then have to think about kind of what problem we're trying to solve, right? So this is an issue that sort of really troubles that binary and kind of speaks into a system that isn't well designed to address it. And before we start addressing it well, are we really clear about the problem that we are in fact trying to solve? There have been recent researchers who, raised some really interesting, compelling questions about, should we revisit the term county lines? Has it become sort of like a thing with a life of its own that's unhelpful? That terminology, is it helpful at all? And are some policy discourses then obscuring, using that language, some of those structural drivers, making it harder to develop new nuanced safeguarding responses? Are we not seeing some of the kind of easier fixes to this problem that we could all decide as a society to embrace? And instead, we're trying to kind of zero in on this child carrying a knife, right? And that's going to be the solution to fix a problem that maybe isn't the right problem to be trying to solve. So I've got, I actually forgot to look at my clock when I started, but I'm pretty sure I've got, 5 minutes left or so. How's that sound, Lucy?
Yeah, you're good.
Excellent. I'm deathly afraid of going over my time because the other presenters have very important things to share. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a piece of research that has been done locally. What we did was, across 3 local authorities, surveyed professionals. I've got the kind of bits of data on the screen there for you to read. We did some interviews with parents and key professionals, some focus groups, and then we didn't interview young people directly because they had just been interviewed through a consultation process. So those young people who'd been interviewed as part of the consultation process, they gave permission for the notes to be included. And what we did is we kind of took, because we didn't want to start from scratch and say, this is a new problem no one's ever looked at. We wanted to say, this is a problem we know about. We can draw on a good body of research on, for example, child sexual exploitation to say we do know some things about working with young people. So we looked at a couple of theories to kind of analyze the data. We looked at Carleen Furman's contextual safeguarding theory. So this idea of reorienting the child protection system to respond to risks outside the family home and in contexts, so that those contexts where young people are unsafe are made safer through the system. And also Doreen Massey's theory of space and power. So this idea that there are kind of moments throughout a young person's life trajectory where that sort of power shifts and where there are opportunities to kind of intervene and to speak into their lives, where there's points through all of our lives where we're not malleable, but where we're kind of open to change. And what does that look like throughout a trajectory? And what we found in that research, and I would say that this is true particularly for this piece of research, but it's also true for 2 other projects I'm doing nationally on criminal exploitation, is that first, parents and young people really did experience serious forms of harm, right? So we can't sort of minimize the fact that parents were paying up drug debts, that young people and parents felt in fear of their lives, and that they sort of felt trapped in a system where they didn't feel like consequences were going to be addressed for the people that they felt most threatened by. And so but sometimes there were instances where their experiences did align with county lines and how it's conceptualized, and other times it was what people called local drugs for local people, right? So actually there were kind of localized problems of drug distribution and exploitation that maybe didn't fit that picture. So we had to sort of think, is the media picture, whatever documentary we've seen on the BBC about county lines, is that sort of capturing the nuanced perspective of young people's experiences? Sometimes, but not always. We also really recognized in this research that young people's experiences of safety in one context, for example, in their peers context, often were at odds with the safety in other contexts. So that these were young people who were constantly having to navigate. If I behave in a way that keeps the police and the criminal justice system and social workers off my back, I don't carry a knife, I don't go here or there, I don't do some of these things, that puts me at risk of safety in the other context that I'm in. And so I'm always weighing myself as a young person, I'm holding all of that tension in my head. Which context should I prioritize? Which is going to make me safer in this moment? And so I might make a decision to stay safer in a peer context that puts me at risk of trouble in other contexts, but that's quite a logical and good decision for me at the time. And does the system respond to that young person's felt sense of safety? There were instances in this research where a young person would tell a professional, I feel unsafe, can you get me out of here right now? And the professional would be like, I'm sorry, we have to put together a meeting for that, which will happen in 3 days. And then we'll look for a bed and it might be somewhere else. And actually, then the young person says, I'll just keep myself safe. Thanks. And then this situated in temporal nature of criminal exploitation sometimes remains, it's overlooked in under-resourced safeguarding systems. So can we respond flexibly? There's a great quote from a police officer in the study that said, these criminal groups are like little speedboats and we're just a massive, great shipping container trying to maneuver, trying to look at how we then deal with each of these problems. And it really struck us, the paper we just submitted recently uses that as the title, because it really struck us that, are we trying to, as a system, to work with young people to come alongside them and just make the shipping container more effective? Or are we going, wait a minute, is a shipping container the right response? Like, do we need something different to respond to them? Or are we just trying to make more robust this big kind of unmaneuverable shipping container of a system that isn't really reflecting the kind of flexible, responsive, safeguarding system that they might need? So what we found in the research, and some of our kind of the takeaway points here, I guess I have for you all, and I'd be interested to hear any of your thoughts, is that we have to approach working with young people and supporting them and coming alongside them when they're being criminally exploited or they're at risk of exploitation as a process that's necessarily not straightforward, that we're not looking for a holy grail, we're not looking for a kind of solution that's going to fix something when that problem isn't straightforward for them. And that creating safety requires defining it as a movable construct, right? There isn't a kind of one way of thinking about safety. And that it has to be informed by that young person's, their own perspective on their safety, recognizing their own best efforts to stay safe. They're navigating this context. They're going back and forth and saying, at each moment, how can I keep myself safe? Does the system, do the people around them recognize their efforts and what that looks like for them? Because sometimes safety for a traumatized child doesn't look like safe to us. An overemphasis on disrupting criminal behavior can sometimes take the focus away from targeting social conditions in contexts where harm occurs. So we're spending a lot of time making sure that we disrupt, like I'm sure that you have this game here in America with like whack-a-mole, like an arcade, where you're like pounding down. Okay, we've got this network's disrupted, this peer group's disbanded. They're no longer at the McDonald's or this park, but now they're over here, right? So are we saying, wait a minute, can we all collectively take a step back and say, what are the conditions and contexts that are allowing this harm to thrive, that are allowing adults to step into spaces where young people are not getting their needs met in other ways? That are we as a system, and I speak certainly as a qualified social worker, spent a lot of time with social workers, as a system, is risk aversion within that system foreshortening our capacity to reflect on the complexity of their victimization and offending? Are we just trying to kind of come in with a sort of a chopping block to say we feel out of control as professionals because this is a scary situation, so we're going to make decisions based upon our own aversion to risk and our own need as a system to feel safe, rather than going, can we see this more in a more nuanced way? Because that more nuanced way, that participatory way of involving a person and thinking creatively, is about protecting them in the long run. And then can we create imaginative spaces? And I think you're going to hear after me several people talking about some of this imaginative work, but can we create imaginative spaces where, to go back to the shipping container analogy, a vehicle for change is more efficient than just an improved shipping container? Can we think about what is a jet ski, right? What is a whole range of, a paddleboard? What are the other things that we can introduce to this system that can be kind of imagined for, but also alongside it with young people, so that sense of safety is co-constructed and their world and the context they're in do become safer even over time. All right. I don't think you need a reference list because that's less interesting, but the slide here has got my contact details because I'm happy to be contacted afterwards, any questions, and also has a link to the Innovate project, which is where a little bit of this research is coming from.
Thank you, Christine. I mean, if anyone has any questions, I know, Christine, you've got to go in a minute, haven't you? So if you have questions, please ask them now or get in touch individually. I'm not going to go with the tagline of whack-a-mole doesn't work, although I did write that down. But I like we said at the beginning about allowing for teenage brain evolution. Mm-hmm. There's loads of evidence about how our brains are still forming at that age. So you can't judge them individually as a group, which you shouldn't do anyway in any sort of area. I really like that sort of the tanker as well. Is that how do we create a more dynamic system, and what are the barriers to that? Is it bureaucracy? Is it historical sort of the way it's been built? Is it too difficult to break it down? Is that basically the problem?
That's a question you're asking me, right?
Mm.
So that is a question that's like a whole webinar series, really. So I think there are really competing perspectives on this. And one of the things we're doing in the Innovate project is trying to answer that question a bit and to say, can incremental practice change, for example, orienting a response to a context rather than an individual child's felt, unsafety or harm? Can incremental practice change achieve that? Or does it require a whole system overhaul, right? Does the whole system really need to change? And is there any capacity to do that? And what does that look like? And what is the national policy context that either facilitates that or that inhibits it, that says maybe it's a good idea. For example, contextual safeguarding is now written into working together. It's written into guidance. People are talking about it, but are systems being reoriented to actually respond to context of harm? Or are people constantly handing it back to each other and saying, it's not our problem, we don't have any money. It's not your problem, you don't have any money. And saying, and is there a sort of like public appetite to see young people in a different way, So I think it's, we're still, that's sort of a question that remains, but I think, I remain hopeful because I've seen constantly interesting practice examples of spaces within statutory systems and voluntary sector organizations where people are saying, wait, let's do something really different. Let's try this out. Let's kind of be vulnerable ourselves and sort of wonder together what might be possible.
So it's evolution, because change always feels too big. Going back to the tanker, I like the fact, let's get some, as you said, let's get some jet skis on that tanker. Because taking the tanker apart just won't happen within the timelines we need this to.
Yeah.
Good comment from John. I think the sharing of information and reluctance to share with the introduction of GDPR is at the root of challenges in dealing with young people and county lines.
I think it's definitely, when we're looking at innovation in practice systems, it's something that sometimes there's a cart before the horse issue where we're seeing people like, we need to talk about peer groups, and all of a sudden running into ethical problems like, wait a minute, these kids aren't really in the system. Who should be talking about them? Should we be bringing personal issues? Should young people be talked about in this way? Who's in the room? But I have seen people grappling with this really well. We watched a meeting observation in a local authority recently where the person leading the meeting said, who's here? Who should be here? I think you shouldn't be here. Politely, can you leave? You know what I mean? Oh, wait, we're going to take this young person off this conversation because ethically they shouldn't be a part, So, but we're not going to not do it. We're going to find ways to do it well. But I think it's, the issue of the ethical way of reorienting a system to talk about peer groups and to look at context is complicated.
And you say it's not one size fits all. Every individual has a different need.
Yeah.
So, and that makes it there is no easy solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for letting us borrow you. I know you've got to go now.
Yeah, someone did just ask about
the slides, yeah.
And someone else asked about parents, 4 parents. This is Yes, yes. So in this particular piece of research, someone asked about why talking to four parents, only talking to four parents. So this piece was a kind of exploratory piece of research. So we wanted to make sure that we did capture parents' views, but getting it to the point where parents were in a place where they felt able to kind of have this conversation. So both they were aware of their child's situation, they were a little bit beyond the point of feeling kind of in crisis themselves. And I think the issue in this research, there's an ethical imperative for us as researchers to make sure we do from the outset include parents and young people's voices in it, is still a kind of continual thing that we're grappling with. So it felt important to include the four parents with an understanding that that's, that we wouldn't be able to say much beyond, for example, their experiences.
I think that question must have come to you directly. So I haven't got that one in my chat. So yeah, please ask if you can to me. I mean, Christine, thank you for picking that up. I don't always ask the panel to do the admin as well as being the experts, but Christine, thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And I'll let you go now.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Next, we have Michelle, Joe, and Sam.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Hunter, and I'm the Director of Programmes at AudioActive and the Designated Safeguarding Lead. A little bit about our charities that we've been running since 1999 across Sussex, and we are now kind of picking up our momentum over in Crawley and Worthing. Today, rather than me whittering on about what we do, I thought I'd bring along two of my colleagues who work directly with young people and children. And they're amazed at what they do. So I'm going to pass over to Joe, because Joe actually needs to run away in a minute. And then we'll go over to Sam, and then hopefully we're going to play you a video just really about youth voice and how we are trying to make sure that young people have a voice within AudioActive. And that will demonstrate the work we do, not just directly with young people who are involved in county lines. And just to kind of add in that we really see music as a tool to support young people to feel like they're part of their community and create again. So I'll hand over to Joe.
Hi guys, yeah, my name's Jo Bates. I'm a Programme Manager at AudioActive. I'm just going to talk to you specifically today about our Shift programme, which is a mentoring programme we run with young, vulnerable people that have been flagged up as at risk of exploitation involved in serious crime and violence. Most of the referrals come through schools, but we also get them from youth offending, social services, youth service, kind of a whole range of young people's spaces, basically. And the way it works is we match a young person with a mentor. Sam will talk about that in a bit more detail after me, because he actually is a frontline mentor. But we do a bit of a matching process with the young person to find out what sort of music they want to make, what things they're interested in, the kind of mentor they might like, and then we offer them a sort of a program of initially 12 sessions, one-to-one. We can deliver that in schools or in youth clubs or different spaces. And I think, coming back to Christine's point about the kind of more imaginative approaches, what we know from our experience of working with music as a tool to engage some of these young people is it's really incredibly powerful. And many of these young people, as we know, are really sort of a bit cautious around statutory agencies and services. They might have had a lot of sort of long-term involvement. We know that all these young people have got sort of multiple sort of challenges in their life, and a lot of them are at risk of exclusion or have been excluded, which is obviously raising their risk of getting drawn in and involved with risky behaviour. So it's a very sort of very bespoke programme, and we're just a kind of a spoke in a larger wheel. You know, you have to work collectively with other agencies to sort of try and find solutions to support these young people. They're all incredibly vulnerable, and it is really important, a bit like how what Christine flagged up, really, not to locate the problem in the young person, because it's a much wider structural conversation around opportunity, politics, money, relationships. It's a huge discussion as to why these young people end up in these very vulnerable situations. But ultimately, we are focused on trying to sort of help build their confidence, offer them an alternative. AudioActive is very much a community, and we believe in that model of bringing young people into a thriving music community where they have opportunities to make new friends, be part of something exciting, perform, write songs about their experiences. So it's an opportunity to get stuff off their chest and talk about things they might have been through in a safe way with a mentor that can guide and support them through that process. It's also incredibly validating when a young person has an opportunity to share music with sometimes their families they might not have done before, Often these young people are viewed very negatively by adults around them, whether that's, you know, a whole range of professionals, because they can be very challenging and very difficult at times as well. But we're in quite a privileged position because music is such a universal language, and it's really a way in with a lot of these young people who really will not engage with other sort of tools or kind of more traditional kinds of like therapy or counselling. And we just know from experience that it can be really life-changing. We've worked with loads of young people where there's been like significant change. You know, they're more able to kind of talk about things, build relationships, just see themselves in a different way. And of course, that's not, you know, it's a complex conversation, this, and there's many things that need to be put in place to support these young people. But AudioActive, I think, does a really brilliant job. The mentors are absolutely fantastic. They're all musicians themselves, and they're very credible for the young people to build relationships with. And yeah, I just know, having seen it myself, how powerful our interventions can be with certain young people in our community that are very difficult to reach. And I do think we are able to sort of start thinking about some of those conversations about choices and opportunities that they've got, and sort of present something that's a little bit different. So it's called Shift. It's one-to-one mentoring, and we always aim to kind of feed young people through pathways if possible to get them into wider groups as well, and to get involved in other AudioActive opportunities as much as possible. So I'm going to pass over to Sam, who is a frontline mentor, and can talk to you a bit about his experiences. I've got to go, so sorry to be so brief, but thanks for having me, guys, and it's really nice to see everyone.
Thanks,
see
Jo.
Thanks. Sorry I talked so quickly as well.
Thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. How you doing? Yeah, Jo said quite a lot, so I'm going to try to say new stuff on top of that, but I thought she covered quite a bit. My name's Sam. I'm a frontline, I guess what you call a frontline worker for AudioActive. I work on the Shift program that Jo was talking about. I've been working on it for probably about 4 years now. I'm working for AudioActive for a little bit longer. The Shift program and the group work that we do has brought up some interesting things about county lines for me, and just also experiences that I went through growing up and being local. When I talk, I'm going to be talking about Brighton, really. Worthing and Crawley I work in, but I don't know the nuances of like the local situation as well as I do in Brighton, if that makes sense. And so I'm going to be talking about Brighton mainly, but I think I think like Christine said, I kind of agree with the fact that there is like it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than people make it out to be. I think county lines is kind of almost like a blanket blame term for a lot of different things, personally. You know, I think we've got a lot of problems with drugs locally, and we've got a lot of young people getting exploited locally by local people. And I think county lines can almost be used to sort of shift the blame away from some of the things and reasons why young people are getting involved with that sort of thing. So that's something that I've seen firsthand in my work. By the way, I'm not detracting from the fact that like county lines exist or anything like that. I've also worked with lots of young people that have been involved. I just think that it's a really simplistic discussion sometimes, and it needs to be a lot more in depth about the different factors and different reasons that people get involved and the different ways that they do get involved. We did some work actually for AudioActive, if we're talking about alternative spaces, where we went to a park in Brighton, Notorious Park. I probably don't have to say the name of it. I'm sure you'll know which park that would be. And these young people were supposedly part of county lines exploitation, and they weren't engaging with any services. They wouldn't go to any youth clubs. Majority of them were involved in youth offending service in some way, but they weren't really engaging in any programs, etc., etc. They weren't engaging with anything or going anywhere. They were just in this park most of the time, basically. So we kind of had like an emergency thing, and we were like, what should we do? And then we were like, well, we'll take the work to them, sort of thing. So we set up in a hut in the park and started working with them, you know. And these are young people that never, like I said, engaged with any services normally. And we started, you know, building like quite a good relationship with them over the weeks, and sort of got to speak to them about what they were going through. They were recording music and using it as a really positive experience. And obviously it had its challenges. You know, we were kind of near to the space where all these things were supposedly going on that they were involved with. But I think it was, in terms of creative spaces, instead of, I think with youth work especially, a lot of it can be trying to promote to young people to get them come to this space, get them to come to that space. And we really actually did it the other way around and sort of took it to them and provided them with like a safe space in a place that I guess wasn't so safe. And I thought that was a really powerful project that we delivered, actually. And touching back on my other point, I think a lot of those young people eventually, not a lot of them, but some of them were arrested, and they kind of were talking about it afterwards and saying that, you know, one of them had moved down from London when they were about 12 years old or something, and they were like 15 now at the time, and they were branded by the police after they got arrested as like a London drug dealer, even though they'd moved to the city as like a 11 or 12-year-old child and been living in Brighton for like 3-4 years. So that kind of just shows that it can be a lot more complicated, I think. But it's not just music that we use as a form of expression. I didn't actually work with this young person myself, but one of my colleagues did, and they were a part of, you know, like genuine county lines exploitation, quite serious actually. And they were sort of provided with one-to-one mentoring through our shift program. And it started off as music, but it became quite clear that this young person was actually very interested in art and creating art. And they've created this whole anti-exploitation art pieces, like rebranding of certain brands. I think there's even one they've done with like the Brighton Council sign, and just Tesco, and it's all tied in with like drug trade and slang. It's really powerful, actually. And that just shows that, you know, we're talking about music at AudioActive, which is obviously our primary focus, but, you know, like the creative scene and the confidence that it gives young people and the self-worth when they're doing like a 12-week program with a mentor, that can lead them to feel confident to explore other stuff. Do you know what I mean? And it's like pretty much every time I work with a young person, if they're still in school, their teacher will come up to me and be like, yeah, you know, they've been much better behaved in this lesson and that lesson and blah, blah, blah. And you might not even see that progress so much yourself, you know, like, I'm like, really? It's still being loud in my group, but he's being good in English and maths. So yeah, I think shift is what Joe talked about, but we also do a lot of group sessions in school, sometimes to sort of raise awareness for the shift program before we start it there. So it's just lots of stuff, you know, like all our sessions sort of, AudioActive is one big community and shift is focused with one-to-one interventions, but all the different open access sessions we run, we deal with some of these issues anyway, and we have the same kind of ethos. Shift, because the young people in shift are more on the fringes and more vulnerable, the focus of, not the main focus of shift, but one of the focuses of shift is to, after they finish the 12 weeks, or sometimes they get another group of 12-week sessions, is that they then have the confidence to come to our open access sessions, our group sessions, and the events that we put on. And that helps them to feel part of like the wider creative community that Joe was talking about, and just gives them some form of self-worth, really. We also I've worked in a lot of sort of APCs, pupil referral units for AudioActive. And I think, yeah, it's a very interesting thing that I've found in terms of academies, actually. I think the threshold for young people, and I'm speaking to some frontline workers in Prus, the threshold for young people being kicked out of academies because they don't have to answer to the local authority about getting children back into school, means that a lot of young people are being excluded from academies and put into Prus, and they're not managing to get back into school as much as schools that are managed by the local authorities. That's definitely something that I wanted to share. I don't know if it'd be a bit controversial, but it's something that I've definitely found and I believe to be true.
It's important you just shared that, Hatta. So just really conscious of time, and I don't know, sorry to butt in.
Sorry. No, it's cool. Sorry.
We've got time to actually show the video so we can represent what the young people will say about AudioActive, and you can really hear what we do. And I just want to add in, just to say that we do work with young people between the ages of 12 and 25. who have had many experiences, and sometimes because they've got other things going on, they struggle to kind of talk and they get involved with the wrong kind of crowd, if that's what you want to call it. But I think the video will do justice for what we're doing. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
We'll play the video and then we do have some questions as well. So we'll have to come. Yeah, it's all good. While Molly's getting that to work, let's pick up the first question from Richard. I'm finding that many people, young people involved in knife crime murders, have involvement in county lines and creation of dual music with lyrics around dealing with perpetrating violence. Many of them are talented, but how do you steer them towards more positive topics and lyrics?
Do you know what? This is actually, it's really tough because drill music is huge, and a lot of young drill artists are very commercially successful. So when I first started going to AudioActive as a young person, when we were talking crazy stuff in our lyrics, one of the methods that tutors would say would be like, well, you never get played on radio with something like that, or you'll never be successful with something like that. And then obviously that you can't really use that that approach to it anymore. So it's very difficult. I think I guess it's just about sort of providing them and helping them to find a different perspective and sort of understanding that maybe they don't want to promote those sort of things. But again, it is difficult. I think with drill music, it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation. You know, it's like drill kind of came out of the environment of our country and where it is.
Is it a release as well, though? Because they get to you get to talk about everything. As you're saying, a lot of these guys are struggling with articulation. They're not feeling heard. And so if they can kind of release it in that music, it can have a positive, maybe getting it out of their system.
I mean, my thing is always at a very, very base level, like those few hours that young person's in the studio, if they really are like entrenched in that lifestyle, they are at least a few hours where they're safe and out of harm's way.
Yeah. They might evolve beyond it. No. So the videos, we do have some more questions, but let's do the video, then we shall come back.
I started off very shy and I gained a lot of confidence just as people here are like very friendly and they're helpful and are understanding about your like development.
AudioActive is more like a hub where everyone wants to see you grow.
But they try and help you rather than... Yeah.
For these provisions to work and for these to last and to have real legacy, if young people aren't involved in shaping that, then us as adults, we get that stuff wrong. So we have to consult with them, we have to let them shape how it's going to work and give them an equal seat at the table of that process.
They don't consult with young people, it won't tailor to their needs anymore, and it will just move with the generation that originally started with AudioActive rather than staying for young people.
It's important to give the youth a voice and say what they want with their passion and their hobbies.
The old ways of working are no longer going to be a thing anymore, and you know, the youth are going to literally be taking over the world. So it's really important that we actually prioritize and actually give platforms to the youth, giving them the opportunity to actually bring a change.
Do you feel like your voice is taken into account at the moment?
I think my voice is taken into account a lot. Any of the suggestions I've made, it's always been considered, and I feel like I have a part in what goes on at AudioActive and a say.
My voice is heard by everyone around me. Like, if I've got an idea, then I go see someone about it, you know what I'm saying? And it's heard, and then it's processed, and then, you know.
When I was young and exploring music, you know, my musical side and my creative side, I realised I had a voice, and I learned how to use it.
Why do you think it's important for AudioActive to consult with young people?
Just kind of echoing what all the young people have said really, which is they are the future. And I think that they should be involved in every single thing that happens in society.
Would you like to get involved in a youth advisory board?
Yeah, 100%, because, you know, there's things like, you know, no criticism, obviously, but there's stuff that, you know, that could be extra added on to make AudioActive a better place.
I guess so, yeah, I could do that, yeah.
I don't mind, but I don't feel like I'm someone who like have an open mind about these kind of things.
From personal experience, even just like allowing me a voice to express how I feel about AudioActive, you know, from the perspective of being a black, autistic and BPD, you know, suffering type of person.
I would like to give my opinion on what I think could make AudioActive better.
Youth energy always brings change, always gives us an edge, it allows us to be bold.
The young people's voice is like central to the show. It's like the very foundation. We never set the parameters, we ask them what they want. that travels literally throughout the whole city because it's on the FM airwaves. Thousands of people hear it, which again I think is like just really validating and empowering for the young people to know. Their voice also feeds back through the whole organisation.
If you want feedback or looking for new ideas, I guess, yeah, it's good to have like inspiration from the people that actually are making music here.
Having young people alongside established trustees is really the lifeblood for AudioActive. We need to hear lived experience and have it represented on our board.
So I first started interacting with AudioActive actually through the rap sessions, and then I started working with AudioActive last year. It's not just useful because of the skills that it's given me, which it really has, but it's also a feeling accomplished thing.
It's integral to youth music in the city, and it's the only space where I am taken seriously, and so are my ambitions.
They treat you like family here, and they saved my life. If I'm not here, I would be getting into trouble. They help me get signposted to mental health services that now help me weekly.
We've met so many talented people, so many people that wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise to go anywhere to explore the musical qualities they have about them. And I feel like this space has done so much to encourage a group of people that might not necessarily be vocal about their feelings.
Because it's like straight away a community is being built of young people who know that there's other young people into what they're into.
How important is it to you that we have a space like this in town?
It's important because then I say that like my day's not going well and like, this is open, I can come here, make like beats or like, express my feelings in like, songs and that, like I have been.
My worst days, even though you gave me the worst days, I'm still missing something I can't replace.
Do you feel like it's a welcoming enough space for young people?
Right. I mean, you guys gave me an opportunity to came here. I feel like that was a good thing because, yeah, nobody really ever done that. So for me to just come here and sit here, that's a big thing for me.
Yeah. One more time. Yeah, go on.
Welcome to Shevington Crest. Yeah, man, he's arrived. He's arrived now. Yeah, that was hard, bro.
That's it. Thank you for that.
No, it's a great video. The positive energy.
Cool. I think that's the main thing of what we are creating is that young people have somewhere to go where they can actually be heard. And I think, I can't remember the gentleman's name regarding the drill kind of, you know.
Richard's put another question in there as well. So yeah, it's Richard who said that, yeah.
So, you know, when young people are writing about their experiences, sometimes they're writing real life experiences and other times they're not. And one of our practitioners is working with a young man who kept spitting bars about guns, and she said to him, "Have you ever seen a gun?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Well, what do you really want to talk about?" And he went, "I want to talk about my gerbils." But this was a boy who was actually involved in moving quite a lot of drugs across different lines and cities, etc. And he had gone missing for a few days and those kind of things. And Hatter's actually working with a young person at the moment who has been flagged as going missing across different kind of county lines, so to speak. So, you know, as much as we kind of keep the positive vibes and we keep the, you know, the whole kind of when words fail, music speaks, as Bob Marley once said, and, you know, he was one of the greatest. We keep all those things in mind, but we're also really considering what's going on for them. And if they feel safe, then they will finally make better choices and decisions around their future. And hopefully at those points, we can work with services to support them to get the help and support that they need and their families as well. Because as we've all seen, when they're in, they're really in, and it's really hard to get young people out. So yeah, any more questions?
Well, let's pick up the question. I mean, a key thing I was seeing there was just feedback is that they felt heard, and you help them articulate what they need. And I don't think it feels like no one's helping them with that part of the journey. But let's pick up some questions. We've got some expressions. So there's someone who's remaining anonymous on here. saying it's often not possible to get young people affected to engage. What we really need is to upskill the professionals who they come into contact with routinely. Do you know of anybody else who you involved in with schools and GPs and social workers helping do maybe some training or some translation work?
To be really honest with you, the answer to that is no. The people that personally I've seen be so successful in this field is the mentors at AudioActive. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. I've only been in post for 10 months now. And one of the reasons that I came over and worked for AudioActive was the realness. You know, the organisation isn't tied up in all the bureaucratic kind of stuff that goes on across the board. And I think that because they are real, the young people see them as real, and then they're expressing more and more. So obviously when that's fed back to us, we can then support with statutory services and in a multi-agency way that we need to. And also just being part of preventative work within schools is supporting young people to make different choices, and they do turn up to our sessions. The other people that I have seen actually is Mentivity. They're very good, and so is Sid Youth over in West Sussex. So there are other people out there doing it. We're not the only ones, obviously. We never would say we are, but you know, it's kind of a gentle process and a new kind of way of moving forward in West Sussex. And at the moment, we've got 4 schools that we've just been asked to go and work in, Hazelwick and ICC, places like that. And then also we're going to go over to Horsham and do some outreach. We've been in the Memorial Gardens, we've been working with Chigasian community, we've been really in there. And like Hatta said, we go to them if we need to. We're not afraid to go and see where young people are at. And I don't think that it's other people are afraid to, but I don't know if sometimes they can actually get into those places. And, you know, I am not cool, and I'm not going to try and say I'm cool, but the practitioners and mentors that work for us might have been cool once, but that is no more. So, you know, we can support people to kind of move forward and, you know, support young people to have a better relationship sometimes with their parents or their social worker, or if we're working with young people who are referred to as clean skins who have absolutely no services involved at all, then we're learning more about them and we're just kind of gently looking at how we can support that.
You've answered one of the questions already. Someone's asked about you going to Horsham. So there you go, Georgina, it's coming to you. And it sounds like there was a parent on the Q&A who was struggling with their son, and he's like, I want to engage by the sound of that, and that people it feels like people are driven by targets to support. So when there's an immediate risk, it passes. But we need to, your final question, Sandra's asked what percentage of vulnerable people you're reaching with this work. I mean, that's vast, isn't it?
I can actually, yeah, so since October last year up until June this year, we've worked with over 1,000 young people. Now, whether that's directly one-to-one or whether that's been when we're putting on events for young people to come to us and create music and actually have a part on the stage. We've got a thing called Custom Vibes where young people can come along. But just to really finish off very quickly, we're working with a really vulnerable young girl at the moment who's 15 in Worthing. And we've just put her on an array of festivals throughout the summer. And she's about to go and work with a jazz musician on Friday, and she'll be performing at the jazz festival. Now, this young lady has not been in school since she was 12, and she is, for want of a better word, smashing it right now. So we are supporting her to make different choices and to come away from, you know, where she would be and what she was getting involved in. And I personally think in the next few years her name will be in lights. So we'll see what happens with that one.
We shall watch this space. Brilliant stuff. Thank you. We've gone over top, but I love the fact we had lots of chat, lots of questions. So thank you, Sam, Michelle, and to Joe, who's now had to leave us. So Shahrzad, over to you. A little later than expected, but it's great conversation. So I don't mind if the Q&A ends up being a part of this. It's all good, isn't it?
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, it was really good to hear and also to watch that video. That was amazing. A testimony of young people who were experiencing such a thing. Okay, my name is Shahrzad Fouladvand, and I guess I can share my screen. And so yeah, thanks very much again for another series of webinars here. And okay, I think I'm set now. I'm a senior lecturer in international criminal law in the law department, Sussex University. And today it's about county lines, and what I'm trying to do here is to as some of us academics are obsessed with definitions, I think it's good to put that into the context of some of the legislation and to see what is it exactly a county line and what sort of characteristics involved in this. And going off the definitions, I will look into some of the indicators of county lines for children, and then very briefly touching on the impacts of county line on the victims of human trafficking, mainly when they are being prosecuted as criminals rather than being treated as victims. And mainly I am interested in the application of section 45 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015. So for the purpose of today, very brief talk, I am focusing on two important documents. One of them is the Modern Slavery Statutory Guidance, and published by Home Office 2020 first, and also the government report, Serious Violence Strategy in 2018, when they clearly defined the county lines. So as you see here, county lines, the way they it's been defined by the Serious Violence Strategy is a term used to describe gangs and organized criminal networks involved in exporting illegal drugs into one or more importing areas, but the target, of course, is within the UK, using dedicated mobile phone lines or other forms of deal line. They are likely to exploit children and vulnerable adults, so they are the most targeted groups, to move, but also store the drugs and money, and they will often use coercion, intimidation and violence. It could be also sexual violence and weapons. So this is the most kind of important reference, if you like, in relation to the understanding of county line cases. Children and young people are used to carry drugs and money, vulnerable adults, and their home might be taken for use as trap houses. So that is well known for cocoing, as I'm sure some of you already are aware of that. Another important thing in relation to these kind of activities is multiple forms of exploitation. So it could be coercion, trafficking, child sexual exploitation, gun and knife crime could be also involved in county lines. And where children are victims of county lines type activity, they will also be victims of child criminal exploitation. I think it's very important to have that understanding clearly, and the differences, to be able to recognize them, which one are we talking about and which one is actually involved in county lines. It's a kind of a borderline between child sexual exploitation, could be maybe victims of county lines as well as. So that's kind of fine line. I think it's important to pay attention when we are talking about any of those kind of incidents. Now, to clarify on that a bit more in relation to child criminal exploitation, so there is no statutory definition for child criminal exploitation, but then the Serious Violence Strategy report by the government defines it as it's common in county lines and occurs when an individual or group takes advantage of an imbalance of power. So power relations is quite important to coerce, control, manipulate, or deceive a child or young person under the age of 18 into any criminal activity. So the age is quite important, and it's quite compatible with the international and regional conventions in relation to human trafficking and modern slavery. So into any criminal activity in exchange for something the victims needs or wants, for the financial or other advantage of the perpetrator or facilitator, and or through violence or the threat of violence. So the victim may have been criminally exploited, even if the activity appears consensual. So consent is not relevant, as you already may know about the human trafficking and modern slavery offences. And when we're dealing with the case of a child criminal exploitation doesn't always involve physical contact because of the use of technology. If the use of technology been applied, so we can also there have been some cases where there have been involvement of children for that purpose. But then there are a number of other types of exploitation could be involved, like forced labor, forced theft, benefit fraud, drug cultivation and production, as well as counterline cases. I think the other important point to bear in mind is the kind of a set of indicators for counterlines, and as we are focusing on children, so I thought you might be interested to see the indicators of counterlines here. Some of them are quite important, and there have been some cases regularly being based upon those, highlights some of those indicators. For example, missing from school, or even if missing from safe houses or places where it's been run by the local authorities. Unwillingness to explain their whereabouts, if somehow they got some money, or if the number of their calls and messages been increased, and also carrying weapons is important. I mean, even if scissors or blades or things like that. Living home care without explanation, if they've got any injuries but they don't have any justifiable or reasonable explanation for that, and many more, as you will see in this. Again, this is based upon the list prepared by the Modern Slavery Statutory Guidance. But also, I thought you might be interested to see the scale of the problem, some of the facts and figures. And of course, don't forget that counterlines is financially motivated. So the most important incentives for those who are involved is money. And some of the reports are done by the National Crime Agency and Home Office and so forth suggest that counterline gangs make on average of £3,000 per day, up to £5,000 in some cases. There are about 1,000 different counterlines operating across the country, and mainly there are around some areas like London, West Midlands and Merseyside. The estimated profit per line annually is over £800,000, and overall profit annually about over 800. I think that's million pounds, although my math is not really good, but nevertheless it shows huge numbers in there. Carrying on some of the key facts and figures, just to give you some of the scales of the problem. Mainly children aged 15 to 17 years old are most commonly identified or being targeted by the counterlines operations, and estimated 27,000 children in England only identified as a gang member, and 91% of those involved in counterlines are male, although there are some females as well, but the report suggested that they are less likely to be suspected than males. Now, of course, then you may ask the question of how does that impact the overall numbers or overall referrals within the national referral mechanisms. So the in 2020 report done by Children's Society suggested that 807% increase in children referred for support by councils in relation to modern slavery. And Home Office 2020 report suggested that 401 national referral mechanisms referrals flagged as counterlines in the quarter 3 of the 2020. So the majority, it was a massive increase in terms of the majority of those were male children, about 82%. And then just the remaining of my slides, I would like to pay your attention in relation to the statutory defence. And I think that's where we can see the just an angle, the impacts of counterlines. So children may be seen as criminals rather than victims. The most important point in relation to that goes back to Modern Slavery Act 2015, which has the Section 45 defence, which is a great section in order to provide protection to the victims of human trafficking. However, there are some issues in there, and it makes it quite complicated in relation to the application of such statutory defence. And I'll go through some of the points, and I'm not going into great details or some of the cases because it will be more than my given time. But young people involved in counterlines can be regarded as victims of criminal exploitation, as I went through the definition earlier. And also adult gang members can be prosecuted under the Modern Slavery Act 15. So Section 45 is the defence for those who are faced with criminal liability for a criminal act, which has been listed under the Modern Slavery Act, either for modern slavery offences or forced labour or servitude and so on, or for human trafficking offences. But then some of the issues which is kind of ongoing and is quite challenging is that there are some cases where victims have not used this defence and been wrongly imprisoned, and there are, on the other hand, some cases where criminals have attempted to abuse this defence, meaning for example, coaching those young people or children that are being exploited to tell them that if you get arrested, so you can claim that you are or victims of human trafficking, and to use Section 45. So this is a kind of a tricky point in that regard. Now, I would like to just go through some of the details of the way the Section 45 can work for adults, but also for children. It's really important to bear in mind that the defendant will not discharge the burden of proof just because the person has been identified or accepted as a victim of trafficking by the competent authorities. Still, the adult defendant must establish that they were there was compulsion element into the act that they did, the criminal act that they committed. There have been some case laws in like R and MK or R and Giga. So the Lord Chief Justice told that it was for the defendant to raise evidence. And there are 3 steps there, or 3 important links that the adult defendant should go through. There should be some sort of evidence that the defendant did the act because he was compelled to do so. So compulsion is so important. But then that compulsion should is attributable to slavery or relevant exploitation. And also a reasonable person in the same situation as the person and having the person's relevant characteristics, mainly the sex or age, gender or mental health or disability issues, have no realistic alternative to doing the act. And if the prosecution disproves any of the three limbs, so the defense fails. Whereas when we're dealing with a child obviously under the age of 18, they don't need to establish that he or she was compelled to commit the criminal offence. This element of the statutory defence is confined to the adult defence only. Because of course for the child, if you remember the definition of human trafficking, the means, it's not really important. So the burden for a child, meaning that we said the most targeted young people who've been victims of counter lines between 15 and 17, what they really need to do is to bring some evidence that the defendant was under, obviously, age of 18 when they did the act. But also they did the act as a direct consequence of the defendant being a victim of slavery. And again, a reasonable person would come to the same conclusion. But then the most important or the challenging part is this Schedule 4. The defense of this statutory defense 45 does not apply to an offence listed in Schedule 4. And this Schedule 4, there is a list of offences. It's a very, very long list. And interestingly, Section 22 of Offences Against the Person Act 1861 goes for using drugs to commit or assist in the committing of an indictable offence. So that makes it so complicated because there is this Section 45 defense to be able to protect victims of human trafficking, victims who got into counterlines. But on the other hand, we have this Schedule 4, which also includes the drug offences. So if a potential victim of human trafficking is charged with the Schedule 4 offence, he or she cannot rely on a statutory defence, irrespective of whether their offending was a manifestation or a directly linked to their trafficking. And unfortunately, it doesn't distinguish this Schedule 4 or the Section 45 defence. Doesn't distinguish between offences committed by a child victim or adult. And the final point to make it here, because I don't want to give you a lecture or a proper seminar on all those legal issues, but arguably Schedule 4 excluded offences conflict with the Trafficking Convention, because as you may know, we have a Council of Europe Convention on anti-trafficking. But also there is the EU Directive 2011. And they both went for the use of a human rights and child rights-based approach, meaning that exclusion really doesn't come under those provisions. And yet still we have this dilemma of how to actually apply Section 45, or whether how many of those Section 45 been applied. That is a big question. Yeah, so thanks very much, and we'd be happy to hear your comments or observations, really. I'm going to stop my slides here.
Thank you. It's intense, isn't it? Unpacking that. Do we have any questions? Guy has been talking about a recent CREST advisory report. We're going to pop that one into the Possibility Club, so thank you for that, Guy. Do we have any other questions? You've blown them away. They've gone quiet on the chat.
I hope they are still there.
They're all still here, don't worry, no. But it is because you were just really unpacking the complexity and the nuances. It's meaty, isn't it? So insightful, but yeah, challenging. Thank you all.
I think it's important because of the meaning, because the definition is there, but the law, which is going to protect those individuals, then the application of that particular defense is quite challenging because of those reasons that very briefly I mentioned.
Julia saying, of course, we're still here. A very interesting presentation. Thank you, Julia. And Richard has talked about Schedule 4 loophole needs closing. Police and CPS will charge that to avoid the defence, and that doesn't help the child. So some really good insights from the audience as ever. We've had some brilliant input through these chat sessions. Now, last but not least, Maryam.
Right, thanks. Thanks so much for having me here today. It's been really interesting, actually. So I don't get the chance very often to actually to take the time out, as I'm sure most of us are guilty of, to learn from our peers. So that's been really refreshing for me, and it's really good to sort of continue that learning for all of us. So a bit of background about myself. I work for the Children's Society. I was very proud to see us being quoted in Dr. Shahrzad's presentation, whoop, whoop. And I work on the National Child Exploitation Prevention Programme. I lead the programme across the southeast of England. And our focus on the prevention programme is we work with professionals. So we're not a direct practice programme. We don't support children and young people directly. We work with professionals from statutory services, so police and social care. And we also work with other charities, we work with communities, we work with people who operate in public spaces. And the idea is to act as catalysts to help promote change within those organizations and to help create, we might be acting as consultants and supporting statutory services with the development of their policies and their practice, and acting as a critical friend quite often, and helping our partners to recognize their blind spots, and to work collaboratively, really. So that's an open invitation. I did see there are a number of people on this call today, and as people were introducing themselves, I did see that there are people from really interesting backgrounds, and just an open invitation to reach out to me. I think it would be great to work with some of you going forwards. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know this, I'll try and not have much repetition on what others have already covered. I realise that there are probably people in the audience with different levels of knowledge and expertise on this subject area. So just so we're all starting on the same page, just wanted to recognise that child exploitation, put really simply, it's a form of child abuse. And what underpins this dynamic is an imbalance of power. So it's where an individual or a group of people will use force, they will force a child into criminal or sexual behaviour. And so you have an individual or a group of people with a dominant power, and then you'll have someone who is subservient to that. So it's all underpinned, the whole dynamic is underpinned by an imbalance of power. And there are many ways in which criminal and sexual exploitation overlap, and quite often it's quite hard to differentiate between the two of them, or indeed with other forms of exploitation. So most forms of exploitation, they are not taking place in silo, right? It's really important to take a holistic approach and recognize that that quite often these different forms of exploitation do overlap, and it can be quite hard to differentiate between them. So the young person in this dynamic, we're talking about the victim here, they quite often, they may feel like they're receiving something in return, especially in the early stages of that, what's essentially the grooming cycle. They will feel that they are receiving something, and this can quite often, as others have previously said during this session, that a young person will often present themselves as thinking that they are choosing this lifestyle, and they may well think that it's a choice that they're making, and they have autonomy and agency in that situation. And they're going to be made to feel like that. That can be quite problematic. So young people, in terms of our language, we need to be really careful, because a 14-year-old child isn't really going to wake up one day and decide to be a drug dealer, right? The reality is there's going to be so much that goes into that process and that timeline of events. And even if they in the early stages of the grooming cycle, they may well feel that they are making that choice, and this is a consensual relationship because they feel like they're getting something in return, whether that's money, whether that's a sense of sort of protection or camaraderie, or feeling that someone is there who actually cares about them. Whatever that is, they feel that they're getting something in return, and they may feel like they are choosing that lifestyle. And very quickly, what usually happens is that they realize that actually they're not in control, and things escalate very quickly and very dramatically. But it's very difficult for that young person to, as human beings, we crave a feeling of a sense of control over our lives. If we don't feel we have a sense of control, that's really scary for us. And it's the same with young people. So if for example, a young person is picked up by a police officer, they may be presenting as having this sense of bravado and, yeah, I know what I'm doing and this is my choice. But that doesn't, as professionals, we need to be a bit more clever about that situation and actually look beyond the surface and what is going on for that young person deep down. And that bravado and that front, that aggression, it may also be a trauma response, because actually that's how the young person presents themselves to maintain that feeling of control over their life, whereas deep inside they're like, oh my god, I don't know how the hell I'm going to get myself out of this, and I'm so scared. Another point to mention is, so exploitation, it doesn't have to be direct. It can be facilitated through social media platforms, different forms of technology, and that doesn't, in no way does that diminish from the harm that the child or young person may be experiencing. I'm just conscious that this webinar has been facilitated through a university, so I will try and have a bit of a focus of what this, how university students will fit into this paradigm, and the situations which may feel quite unique for university students. And university students are in a unique situation because they're often living alone for the first time with their peers, they're developing new relationships, they're exploring their sense of identity and what it means to be a young adult. And it can be a really exciting but an anxious period of time. It can also be a time when young people are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, both from organised crime groups as well as other perpetrators. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Thank you. So just very quickly, who's most vulnerable to exploitation? Yeah, we've done some research into this, and also are constantly learning from our conversations with our peers and our professional partners, those who are working with children and young people on the front line. So we've got a couple of categories here that we recognise, these cohorts, young people who present themselves as coming from these backgrounds are often more likely to fall victim of child exploitation and are going to be more susceptible to being exploited. And the first one on the list is poverty. And I've got to be careful with that one, because child exploitation is, for want of a better phrase, it's not a poor person's problem. A young person, a child from an affluent background can be exploited and often are exploited. So it's not something that exclusively, I'm not saying that you'll only get child victims of exploitation who come from a poorer background, but poverty is one of those things that it does make a young person more susceptible. As Dr. Shahrzad said, that one of the main motivations for County Lion's involvement is money. It might be other things. Quite often it is money, or money is one of the main motivators. Also, children in care, children living with foster parents, As somebody else said earlier, those who are excluded from school, they might be accessing alternative education provision. So for example, there might be in a pupil referral unit. We see those cohorts of young people being more susceptible to being groomed and exploited. If they have an older sibling, so the family model, so for example, an older sibling might be involved in county lines, or there might be a localized sort of drug, there might be involved in a localized arrangement of drug distribution. Let's say older sibling gets caught by the police and they're now on a curfew, or they're tagged, then they might recruit their younger sibling to take their place. Also, refugee and migrant young people, often they have experienced trauma in their life, so automatically they are, they're more vulnerable, and also quite often they may have an even greater lack of trust towards professionals such as the police and social care, perhaps as a result of how they've been treated by those institutions upon coming into the country, or possibly through their understanding and their perception of those institutions and law enforcement from their home countries. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, so this is more a bit of signposting here for anyone who's interested. So the Children's Society, we've partnered up with the National County Lines Coordination Centre, and we've produced a briefing for university staff. I was part of drafting that, so if you pick up any mistakes, yeah, got nothing to do with me, but happy to share that for anyone who's interested. And just want to focus on a couple of sort of key things we talk about in that briefing, which recognizes, like I've been saying here, that the exploitation cycle, it's underpinned by the grooming process, right? That starts with the targeting stage, where perpetrators will look to identify vulnerable targets, and then they will start to test them. So that's about building a relationship, starting to form, trust, and they will start to test out their loyalty. And then finally, you have the trap stage, where, for the young person, everything feels very much outside of their control. There's full-on exploitation going on. There might be trafficking going on. And due to this grooming process, the manipulation and the coercion that is so often present as part of this cycle. As mentioned earlier, young people who are being exploited or abused, they may not understand, and certainly not in the early stages, will not understand or recognize that they are being exploited. And once they do, unfortunately, they are usually trapped by their situation. There may be, and perpetrators are really, really clever in the way they do this. So that young person, they may be trapped by debt, or by threats to their life, or to their friends, or their family, or their parents. And as a result of all of that, it can be really difficult for them to talk about what might be happening to them, or for them to reach out for help. So, young people and vulnerable adults, they're usually likely to feel really, really scared about what might happen next. And quite often there is distrust towards the police and other adults in authority, and perpetrators will actively foster and encourage that sense of fear and distrust, and use that to their benefit. A little bit about the Look Closer campaign. So at the Children's Society, we've partnered up again with the National County Lines Coordination Centre and the British Transport Police and police forces across the country, and we've launched this national campaign called Look Closer, and we're coming up to it in literally a few weeks' time. So we run it. It usually runs in sync with the Police Week of Action on county lines. So we usually run it twice a year. And the purpose of the campaign is to raise awareness of child exploitation and abuse. So we've got a load of literature and resources available on the website. I'll share the link at the end of the presentation. But the aim is to raise awareness of child exploitation and abuse with a particular focus on public spaces. So the campaign is seeking to challenge stereotypes around victimhood and highlight that child exploitation can happen anywhere and any person can be a victim. So for those of you in the virtual room who are university staff, those of you who are working for YMCAs, those of you who are working for local authorities, not sure if we have any police people in the room, but whoever you are, we can all play a valuable role in spotting the signs of exploitation and, you know, using the necessary mechanisms to report them. And there are some key indicators to look out for. Dr. Shahrzad mentioned some of them, and we've got them in the resources, a look closer resources. But, you know, it's not an exhaustive list of what the indicators might be, and the reality is that exploiters, they will frequently change their tactics. So I think the one takeaway point from all of this, especially those of us who don't work in statutory services, those of us who have that, you know, might be working for YMCAs, have that sort of front-facing interaction with young people, it's really, really crucial to trust your instincts and to apply that professional curiosity, and remember that if something doesn't feel right, then it might not be, and it's better to report a concern than to keep it to yourself. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, just want to speak a little bit about online financial exploitation, because it's an emerging topic and it's a growing one. It's one which I'm not going to be able to do justice in a couple of minutes, but I just want to introduce it. So at the Children's Society, we're at the moment probably sort of leading in the space and working quite closely with the Home Office, with financial institutions and banks to understand this better. It is a topic because it's so new and there is a lack of understanding about it, and we're in that space as well. We're trying to find our way and increase our understanding on, you know, how this works and how, as professionals, what we need to be doing about preventing and disrupting in this space. So we saw over COVID-19 that online generally for most of the population, the time we spend online has increased, and that has meant that criminals have adapted to that and increasingly are targeting their victims in online spaces through social media, through gaming platforms. And again, to reiterate that a young person or a vulnerable adult can be groomed into or experience any form of exploitation online, right, including county lines, criminal exploitation, and as well as sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as financial exploitation. So one known method of financial exploitation which university students are particularly being targeted for involves them holding or moving money that has been obtained from organized crime, and conventionally this is often seen as fraud. So banks, as of right now, banks are not equipped or don't have the structures in place to be able to offer a safeguarding response. So traditionally, the recourse has been to see this as a fraud issue, and that's something we're trying to work on. We're trying to change. So this practice of holding or moving money that has been obtained from organized crime, it's commonly in slang, it's known as squaring or deets. So those are slang terms referring to bank cards as squares or exchanging details. And the victims, they might be approached online through apps such as Snapchat or Instagram or at cash points. And they may be asked to hold money for a short period of time before moving it to a perpetrator's bank account. So the whole process is about it's about perpetrators trying to, I suppose, cleanse dirty money, or they're being very clever in the way that they are hiding that and using a really complicated, sophisticated web and network to conceal their activities and to conceal the fact that this is criminal money. The perpetrators will often be exerting power and control to trap a person into a cycle of abuse and multiple forms of exploitation. So, for example, they may initially target someone for financial exploitation and then tell them that, well, actually the proceeds, that money that you're carrying in your bank account, that's criminal money. And then use that as a threat, use the threat of revealing that information or exposing that young person, holding that as a threat over them, and then initiating sexual abuse or other harms to exploit that person. It's so if because this is treated as of now, this is treated as fraud. If a young person is found with money in their bank account, money from criminal proceeds, then that can have really serious repercussions on the future for that young person and their financial record. So their bank accounts may be closed. There could be a marker put on their name restricting their access to open any bank account for up to 5 years. They can be rejected for loans or phone contracts, and there's a risk of criminalization for them as well. So what can we do to support young people, especially in a university setting? We want to be creating safe spaces to talk about online safety and healthy relationships, to allow young people to feel heard without judgment. We want to be encouraging them to not give out bank details to anyone unless they are trusted family members or close friends, helping them to consider that, if there's an easy money offer, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is going to be too good to be true. So to be extremely wary, and also offer services, signpost to reporting money laundering. So, for example, Action Fraud have an online reporting tool. I believe there's something called a Take 5 scam advice where people can get support from, and reminding the students that, the young people in any situation, that they're not to blame, that they have been targeted by sophisticated criminals. Final slide, please, Stephanie. So I just want to end with zero tolerance policies. Are we there yet? Perfect. So a key significant barrier to students and young people reporting any experience of exploitation and abuse or involvement in drugs or sexual behavior is a concern at how the universities will respond to that, and the risk that they will receive a punitive rather than a supportive response. So if a university has a zero tolerance policy regarding these matters, and a student is a victim of sexual or criminal abuse or exploitation or harm linked to something banned within the zero tolerance policy, such as drugs, then that young person is likely to be fearful of repercussions if they share their experience with the university. So that in turn inhibit the access students have to accessing support. So the key message here is to put the safety of students, making that paramount, so that safeguarding responses that offer support rather than punitive measures. It's something that we would really encourage, and considering whether any zero tolerance policies will impact the students and what alternatives we may be able to provide instead. It can also be really difficult to find the balance between explaining the risks and implications to students whilst not placing the responsibility on them to prevent their own exploitation and abuse. So something really key about a Look Closer campaign is we're saying it's really difficult for, we don't want to be putting the responsibility on young people for them being victimized, just as you wouldn't blame a victim of sexual abuse. Criminal exploitation is something that is not seen as the same way. We don't, as professionals, it's taking us a lot of time to understand and see those young people, those vulnerable adults, as being victims. So it's moving, it's shifting the lens away from putting the responsibility onto the victim, and shifting that responsibility onto wider society, and as adults who live, our civic duty in public spaces, for us to be more aware of spotting signs, to listening to our instincts, and having the confidence to report. That's the key message of Look Closer. It's about, yes, criminals are really sophisticated, they're really clever, and in turn we need to be a bit clever in our response. I'm conscious I'm super out of time. I think that's been a whistle-stop tour. I'll probably end it there, and then we've just got...
You've still got a very engaged audience, Maryam. We've had lots of people who've stayed, and for those who haven't, I have let everybody know that this recording will be on the Possibility Club. So you had a lot to cover. This is the problem with this topic in a good way, is unpacking it from different perspectives. And exactly, look, you're getting some love in the chat. It's really interesting, and I think all 4 of our panel have brought very different perspectives. Thank you, Guy. Excellent panel and webinar. You're getting lots of love. There you go, Maryam. Lots of people are still listening to you. This is the whole point of these sessions, is starting the conversation. And I like that we've ended with a call to action of doing something, of engaging and supporting your next session that you've got coming up. That's what we need at the ending, is we don't want to feel overwhelmed by this. There's a lot of discussion of change, isn't there? We can't change the world overnight, but we can all do our bit to make it a bit better. Oh, see, you're getting lots of love on there, Maryam. You're looking at the chat. But no, we went over because it was good. That's the key thing. I always think it's very positive, isn't it? So thank you all so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to our audience. You've all been wonderful. We love having the conversation. I'm going to say it one last time before we go. Sign up to the Possibility Club and continue it with us. Again, another interesting topic, lots of opinions, lots of perspectives, very proactive. Come and join us for that. And there is also another anti-modern slavery webinar coming up as well. So please continue being a part of this conversation. Thank you all very much, and go out and enjoy the sunshine today.